Welcome to God Power Live, where the original woman comes to connect with her likeness and refine her emotions so she can end the inner war and do what she came here for by way of her career and live the unlived life that's looking to be lived specifically through her. And I'm here every weekday at, for now it's 12 p.m. Pacific. That time could change. My name is Naima. If you're new here, I'm a power mentor, founder of the Academy for Womanhood, where the original woman comes inside of either our flagship Shadow Gold program for primal feminine power and cultivating that power, or coming into our community, which is rare, extremely rare, or any of the other products and services that we offer. I'm currently live streaming on Facebook and TikTok, and every live stream is Facebook and TikTok. TikTok, if you ever would like to see the replay, because I'm here every weekday, you can come on over to Facebook and you can find my business page at facebook.com/Naima Singletary #1. Again, facebook.com/Naima Singletary #1. Hello to those of you who are new here. So this topic today of either some version of my husband will not accept me, he will not grow with me as I come into full power, or because we've been married for decades, he only appeases me now because he knows I'm not going anywhere. He knows I'm not going anywhere, and he doesn't really listen to me or know who I am, or men don't want powerful women, so you know I don't pay attention to men, or there's another thing relating to your inability to sustain power, but that's not for today. That's another time. But today, I like to speak about what has been a recurring theme in the women that I'm working with, most who are married and have been married for a while, whether they are grandmothers or women over 35 who are married with children and have shared that their husband either is not going to grow with her. He's very complacent, right? He has a woman in the house, and particularly it seems that when folks are married for decades or a long time, there's a complacency that comes up in the marriage. There's a, well, he ain't going nowhere, she ain't going nowhere. And then a quiet resentment builds up in both parties. And while neither one of them moves, the relationship becomes this, it's a bind. The way I'm hearing it. I'm sharing it with you the way I'm hearing it from the clients that I'm working with. It's a resentful bind where on the one hand, we're married and we've been here for so long, so it's familiar, it's comfortable, and we're mainly together because we've been together for so long and we're like roommates. And that's typically the people who have been married 20 years or longer. And then the other group who maybe have been married for shorter amounts of time, but there's the awareness of like they know each other enough to know that the spouse is not going to grow much, and like, is this what I have to look forward to for the rest of my life, right? Is this what I have to look forward to? And I've come to know more about myself, and I don't see how I can actually grow in this marriage and be happy without that disturbing the marriage, without there being some kind of dissent and, okay, us not getting along or all the things. So before I go on, this is a deep and wide topic. This is real. This is real life, okay? And there are hard decisions to make for everybody, and there are ways to go about this. So, first of all, let's start with what is true. I always like to go to what is true, okay? Versus what often happens is we make up stories because we're not actually talking honestly with our spouses. And so we make up things in here and we're actually living from the story in our head. We're not living from the reality of things. So, first of all, what is true in your relationship with your husband, or if you're single and you have ideas in your head about men and how men are, and men don't want a powerful women, and da 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 da. Do you have experience that validates what story you're telling? Or have you just made it up based on a feeling that you're having? For example, one woman who I'm working with right now, she's like, well, my husband, he doesn't listen to me. He just appeases me because we've been married over 20 years. He knows I'm not going anywhere, or he just thinks I'm not going anywhere. It's comfortable, he's familiar, right? And, he doesn't really care about what I got going on, how I'm feeling, and he doesn't know who I am. And so the question was, well, have you had a vulnerable conversation with him about who you are? Yeah, I have. Okay, and how did that go? Well, it didn't go so well because X, Y, and Z, right? And then she explained what happened and how the conversation went and what was her real intent, and like really getting into the details of this because we're very emotional. And oftentimes it's our emotions driving the thing, not the truth of what's going on with us. Okay? So it's so important that we start with the truth and get down into the truth with ourselves first. So when we go to either a husband or a fiance or a boyfriend or males who we are dating, that we are in truth and not in feeling. Not saying there's anything wrong with the feeling, but making sure the truth reigns supreme. Thank you for all those hearts. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And so when she described to me how the conversation went and how she felt and etc., I said, it sounds to me like you didn't actually set the conversation up for you to say what you really needed to say. And what you did was you bent yourself and you tried to make yourself fit into the way he wants to have the conversation, the way he is, the way he. So when you even showed up in the conversation, you weren't actually you in the conversation. You were what you felt you needed to be for him to listen to you. Now, this is her situation. Your situation could look very different. Thank you for all the hearts. Thank you, thank you. Your situation could be completely different. Just listen, though, for how you're being in your thoughts and feelings about your husband, your fiance, the men in your life, etc., and thinking that either he's not going to grow with you, he doesn't listen to you, he doesn't want to know who you are, he just appeases you because you've been there for 20 years and he knows you're not going anywhere, okay? So I said to her, I said, it actually doesn't sound like you had a vulnerable conversation with your husband. I said, based on what you've shared with me, first of all, you didn't show up as you showed up as the thing you think you need to be for him to hear you. And so I said, and she's like, yeah, I couldn't even really talk how I wanted to talk because I was so busy trying to be like, And this is a woman who's been married over 20 years. So I want you to know you're not alone in this. If you have like some sort of shame or embarrassment around the fact that I'm supposed to be a grown woman, right? So you're likely over 45, right? And you've been married, and yet and still, there's a way that you still actually don't know how to stand up for yourself. You still don't actually know how to set things up in a way that allows you to communicate what you really want to communicate. Not the thing that you think he will accept or like or, agree with, but what you really want to say in the way that you really want to say it, being who you really are. So she and I actually are going to be meeting today, so it's going to be interesting to see how this turns out. But what I shared with her that I'd like to share with you now is that sincere vulnerability, Sincere. What do I mean by sincere vulnerability? A lot of us thinks that if we just go and talk and that we think we're being vulnerable, it's more of a mental play. It's more of a, I'm just sharing with you my thoughts. I'm sharing with you how I feel. And true, sincere vulnerability gets down into the crux of your real feelings. Now, here's what makes this very powerful and very disarming for someone either who loves you or even people who don't necessarily love you, but they're actually listening to you. Now, here is the fine nuance right here. So many of us have stayed out of our true feelings for so long, okay? We're actually very disconnected from ourselves, which is why there's so much resentment. Thank you for the hearts. Why there's so much resentment, why there is so much pain in our bodies, why we are feeling insignificant in our marriages. We feel like they don't see us, they don't hear us, they don't know us. It's because by way of them not seeing us and by way of them not being present because of how we've been in the relationship, like the word she used was morphed, that she's morphed herself into being a good mother. She's morphed herself into being a good wife at the expense of who she truly is, okay? That because you've done that, that's why he doesn't know you. So that's partly your responsibility, and it's a two-way street because, well, this is the feeling I got from him, so I did that. Or I've morphed myself for my whole life, right? So, one, the nuance here is you really need to get true into the as bottom as you can get about the feeling, the source of the feeling, why you feel this way, like what is really going on in there. Because if you show up thinking like, well, I'm showing up to have a heartful conversation, like your conscious mind is saying that, but really your deep mind is like, I'm showing up because I want to tell his ass off. Your deep mind is showing up with a lot of anger and resentment that's prohibiting you from showing up in true vulnerability. Because true vulnerability puts no responsibility on the other person, no blame, no onus on the other person, and it is completely self-responsible, entirely self-responsible. And it looks something like this. You know, and this is imagining you're talking to your husband, fiance, boyfriend. You know, since I was about 7 years old, I have whittled myself down. I have played small because my mother said, you know, girls who are loud don't get husbands. Because I watched my mother play small with her husband. I watched my mother be one way with her husband and be another way when she wasn't around him. And I realized that what I made that mean for me is that I could never speak up in my relationship. I made that mean that women have to lie and become modified, smaller versions of themselves to get married, and that's just the way it goes. And for my whole life, I've just thought that's the way it is. I didn't know that I could say what I really need to say in this marriage because you wouldn't have married me, or you would want a divorce, or I would be seen as, you know, a bad wife. And so for the last 20 years, I have not been true to who I am. And I take responsibility for that. I realized that I was scared of what it would mean to be who I really am in this relationship, and that I have been being my mother this entire time in this relationship. And what that has cost me is that I have resented you for my own actions. I have resented you for seeing only what I've given you, when had I told you before we got married who I am, showed you who I was before I got married, you would have had an opportunity to accept or not the real me. And so I take responsibility that I have resentment because of my own ways of showing up in this marriage. And what's now important to me is that you know who I am. It's important for the health of this relationship. It's important for my mental health. It's important for me to feel liberated in my body. It's important for me to no longer resent myself and resent you. It's important for me to be true. It's important for me to be an example to our daughter and our son, so that my daughter doesn't go in her marriage and do what she's watched me do for the last 20 years. My granddaughter doesn't watch me do and go duplicate the same thing. I cannot tell her to be true in her marriage, to be honest with her husband, when she watches me lie, watches me say things I don't mean, watches me play small and resents you the whole while. I cannot be mad at her. I cannot be mad at you for that. And so now what's important for me to be is true. And who I really am is I'm a wild woman. I enjoy when you touch me. I enjoy this. I enjoy this. I want that. This makes me come alive. I need this. I need this so much. I feel so disconnected from you and angry at you because I've never told you that this is what I needed. Like, when you come like that and you create the environment where you're not trying to rush through the conversation because he needs to leave for work, where you don't just try to plop it on him one Saturday night because it seemed like it's a good time, where you don't wait until you're angry and suddenly, because the fire of the anger gives you the courage to say it, then you go and you yell and you say it and you don't really get it across, and then you blame him and you make him the reason why. No. When you create the conditions that you need, meaning, baby, I need to talk to you when we don't have any distractions, where we don't need to rush to go do something, where we're hungry. Make sure you are both fed, because being hungry can make you not be present the way you need to be present in a conversation. Making sure you have sat down with yourself ahead of time, where you don't just sit there because it's time and then you just plop it out and hope it, but you sit down with yourself ahead of time and you get into honesty with yourself about your feelings. If you need to hire somebody, if you need to talk to a girlfriend, if you need to go, but you sit down with yourself in advance and look, okay, why do I really want to have this conversation with my husband? What do I need to say? What would be a problem that if at the end of this conversation I didn't say it? What do we need to talk about? What have I withheld for the last 12 years? So that you reconcile all that with yourself. Because remember, true, deep, sincere vulnerability has zero to do with the other person and is complete responsibility for how you have showed up in that conversation, in that relationship for the last 3 years, 10 years, 20 plus years. Okay? And so I shared this with my client and I said, this is how you need to show up in this conversation with your husband. Okay? And so I actually look forward to meeting with her today to see how this went, because a lot of women are either not having the conversation at all, or they're trying to show up in it in this sort of like modified way because they're afraid that he won't accept what they have to say, or because they're just so used to him not hearing what she has to say anyway, and he calls everything she does complaining anyway. So it's like, so this is what I wanted to talk to you about. And so there's a kind of internal eye roll going on in the conversation. There's an internal resentment, you know, and almost like going into the conversation failed. You've already failed before you even arrive to the conversation. So that's one piece that I want to articulate here for those of you who resonate with that. Another piece here is the whole men don't want a powerful woman story that many of us have. I'll speak for myself right here. I have had experiences, so that it's not made up stories. Remember I said earlier, how much of what you are saying, thinking, and engaging with men, potential dating prospects or whatever a man can do in your life, how much are you filtering it through just a story you made up because of an unprocessed event in your life with males, or how much of it is based on real experience? Okay? So for example, I have actual experience with several men who have expressed, either through not being there for me, or who just couldn't give me what I needed, where I could say, well, I have examples in my life where because I didn't behave in a way where this man wanted me to behave. So, for example, I used to date a guy, a Nigerian guy, as a matter of fact, who one day we were at the house and I wanted to go work at a coffee shop. And I told him, hey, so I'm getting ready to go work at a coffee shop. And he's like, so do you want me to come with you? And I was like, no, that's okay. And he was like, are you sure? I was like, yeah, I'm sure. I'm fine. And so I went to the coffee shop to work. And when I got to the coffee shop and I went over to the table where I was going to work and started to pull out my things, he literally walked up behind me. And there was this kind of like, you know, no, I'm here. I'm coming, right? Which in a way was fine, but that was the beginning of what was to come. Later in the relationship, I wanted to go get something to eat without him. It was a takeaway. I was going to go pick it up, come back to the house. I said, I'm going to go get something to eat. Went to go get something to eat, and the place where I got the food overcharged me. And I had a feeling they overcharged me, but I wasn't sure. So when I got back to the house, this is what I got, this is what I paid. He's like, they overcharged you. I was like, you know what? I thought they overcharged me. I said, I want you to come with me and let's go and deal with this. Because this was a place in our neighborhood, and it's like, come on now, this is going to be a place we're freaking. I said, I want you to come with me and let's deal with this. He said, no, you should have never went without me, is what he said, okay? So this is a man who was very adamant about me moving and behaving exactly the way he wanted me to move and behave. Then I have another experience with a man who, at the beginning of our relationship, we didn't date long. He, in the beginning of the relationship where you are showing different parts of yourself because you want the person to know who you are so they can actually know who you are, and as the relationship goes ahead, they know who you are, and vice versa. So I remember we were out to dinner one night, and I was just sharing some things with him that it's like, and I was in my mid-30s. It's like, by this time, we need to be true. We need to be honest. We need to be adults here. Somebody asked, are you in the U.S.? I am. Why do you ask? And so I'm like sharing with him bits about who I am, the work that I do, what it's like being me, etc. And he sort of gives me a look like, and then in moments that followed that moment, there was this quiet, how folks communicate. It's not always verbally. Sometimes it's just a quiet, it's a look, it's a slick thing that'll be said, where it was very clear to me that he needed me to behave a certain way and be a certain way. And this was also a man who was like, and this is the first time I'd ever heard such a thing. He's like, when people see you, I want them to ask, who does she belong to? I remember him saying that to me. When people look at you, I want them to ask, who does she belong to? Like, so there was a certain look he wanted me to have. There was a certain, and I was just like enthralled. I was just like, wow, not enthralled. I was like, and I didn't say anything, because this is what we do a lot of times. We don't say anything and we stay with that guy, and then we wonder, 15 years later, do we calling him a narcissist? You know what I mean? Well, when he showed you 3 months in that there's strict protocols in this thing, okay? And so, then, other men where it's like they couldn't give me what I needed emotionally, financially. And so I have real world experiences. These are not made up stories in my head about how men are and I'm just an angry thing that's just because, right? I have actual experiences with men who, feminine power, no. Prime, no. You being laughing loud, no. And when I'm like truly laughing at something, a loud laugh will come out just involuntarily, just like a little simple things that will cut. You got to think twice before you laugh. You got to think. You know what I mean? Now, I'm not saying there's not a time and place for things. Come on now, we're not talking about just mannishness all over the place and folks don't know how to be mindful of their environments. And come on, we're evolved in our thinking. But what I'm saying, where you sort of like feel like you have a police with you at all times. He's policing everything about the way you move, the way you. And I felt oftentimes that really my job was to look good. Don't think too much. Don't say too much. Be available for sex, for sure. Okay, be available for sex. But just look good. And I will come to you and ask you and talk to you when I want to come to you and ask you and talk to you. Okay? Now, when I say that, doesn't that sound like sort of like how, for those of you who have read stories about history, how men were centuries ago? Doesn't that sort of sound like anybody here? Doesn't that sort of sound familiar, but not like modern? It sounds like something. I mean, like this was true for me in my 30s. We're talking about modern, okay? And so the conversations that women are having about how men are not evolving, right? For those of us who are single and are out here engaging with men, Rebel says, I see it all the time. Yeah. They're like, the men are not evolving. Like, what's going on here? And so before we go further, I just want to say how much of it is real and how much of it is in your head. Now, I can speak from my own experience that it has been real for me in many ways. And so I really just had to accept, and this is where I want to go in the conversation now about the price to pay. Okay, let's have a conversation about the price to pay to be who you really are. What is the price to pay? So maybe we can even talk about it about the price to pay either way, right? Because there are certain things that I can have right now if I played a modified version of myself and made that my normal. I very easily attract men, very easily. I very easily attract affluent men. I very easily attract affluent men of all races, black, white, mainly black and white. Those are the ones who give me the eye, who look for permission to come over, okay? Black and white affluent men, okay? So I could easily, and I know men, like I know how to read people and give them what they want, particularly men, right? And because men are pretty simple creatures, there's not much creativity that's involved, that's required. First of all, if you look good and they are attracted to how you look, that's half done. Then when you know how to appeal to male wants and male ego and that particular man that you're engaging with, because all men are different in their own ways, but you know how to study that man, look at him, read him, I could very easily, and I'm hot, I'm gonna be hot forever. I could very easily, you know, shift my voice and smile. And I do smile. Listen, I'm not saying I don't smile. Okay? But you know what I mean, right? Like all the things that makes him just like, I gotta have her. Okay? And the price that I would pay for that over time, right? So what that also means is the way that I boisterously laugh, little things. Perhaps the way I like to wear, I like to have cleavage, or I like to have a fitted dress. Who knows, right? Like I like to walk around the house naked. Like maybe he doesn't like that. Who knows, right? I like a lot of time by myself. I like to be alone a lot. Okay? And so, right, and when I say alone, I like to go out and dine alone. I like to go out and do, right? And apparently some men have a problem with you going out and dining alone, because I had an ex who had a problem with that, okay? And so I could modify, play the game, and be completely provided for financially. These men have assets. So I could have assets put in my name. I could, you know, it's just a lot of financially easier things that I could have that would be what I would get. That's the reward, if you want to call it that, that I would get for playing a smaller version of myself. Now, for those of you who know women who have done such a thing and you have had personal conversations with them, we hear what the payoff for that is emotionally over time. I know online there's a lot of content around he pays all the bills, he's a provider, and look at this life I get to live, right? And we see a reel where she's living in this gorgeous home, right? She has all the amenities. She's shopping in the middle of the day. She's completely provided for, right? And there's a sort of ease, and it's very attractive, right? Especially if you're a woman who works for your money, right? You are busy, maybe you feel tired and all the things. That looks very attractive to a certain eye, okay? I'm also a woman who was married, okay? And I had a husband who completely provided. I didn't even have to work. I worked because I wanted to, not because I had to. He was a generous man. So I know what it looks like I know what it looks like, feels like, to not only be provided for, but not feel like a lot of women feel that, oh, he's paying all the bills, so I better suck his dick every day. I better make sure I'm like this. I better make sure, sort of like feeling like you owe him all the time because he's paying all the bills. I never felt like that in my marriage. My husband was generous. He would come home and be like, you want to go shopping? I never worried about money. I never had to like check the bank account. I never had to be like, honey, can I buy this? And hide bags and shit. I never had to do any of that. And over time, I started to realize that the woman that I knew I was to become could not happen in that marriage. Like so many of the women who are married now, and they're now mothers and grandmothers and have lived most of their life, and they resent their husbands. So in the beginning, it's convenient. It feels good. It looks good. And yes, there are benefits. When you don't have to think about making money, you don't have to go to a job. And I didn't have kids when I was married. So I didn't have kids. I mean, I had time on my hands. I could shop. I could think. I could sit home and watch TV. I could do other things that I just decided to do throughout the day. I could plan things for he and I. Now, I did clean, okay? I did cook, but that was easy to do. Well, we were two people. No kids were around. Super simple, okay? And over time, I was like, there's more. Like so many women who come to me who are like, I'm a wife and I'm a mom, but there's so much more to me. And so the price that you pay over time is getting to 45, 55, and you know there's so much more, and you resent your husband, and you're closer to death, and now you want to be true. And now you're like, I love my children to death, or to life, right? There's been so much benefits to being provided for by my husband, but it's come at the cost of everything I mentioned. Then the price you pay on this side, and this side could be even looked at as where I am now. One, I'm responsible for paying for everything. So that could be seen as a burden, right? I work. If I don't work, there's nobody paying the bills. I can't be like, no, I do have plenty of days where I'm like, I'm gonna take it easy today. I mean, I have it set up like that now, okay? So I can do that now. I could be like, I'm not doing this for a week, and I don't do it for a week, right? Or I could be like, today is gonna be lighter. I'm gonna work lighter. Or I could be like, yeah, today is gonna be a go day, and it's a go day. But at the end of the day, I pay all my bills. There's nobody to fall on to pay a bill. When a bill needs to be paid, the money is coming from me. That's a price to pay, okay? I'm not having regular sex. That's a price to pay. Like if you're sexually frustrated or, whatever it is that you may be feeling around sexual connection with a man, that's a price to pay. There are plenty of men who find me undesirable because I think, because I have experiences in the world, because I'm well-traveled, because I critically think, because I'm smarter than them. In reality, practically, I am smarter than them. And for us to have a conversation, I would have to keep my mouth shut a lot. I would not be able to share diverse, dynamic perspectives, because if I did, they would feel insecure. They wouldn't feel like a man. They would feel like I'm too experienced. They would feel emasculated. I can't talk about money that I'm making. I can't talk about freedoms that I have in my life that I've created for myself. Like all that is a price to pay for being on this side, if you want to call it that, right? And so many men don't know how to be in relationship with a woman where either she makes more money than them or makes good money. Excuse me, sir, I still want you to pay my bills. Even if we make the same amount of money or I make more money than you, even if I'm smart, you see. And so that is the cost over here. Now, let's take it even further. Let's take it to your last year on earth. Nish, hi Nish, she says, as far as the intelligence, I felt like this for years and I'm only 34. Yeah, I understand that, because when I was even in my late 20s, I remember dating this guy in my late 20s and he was mad. I moved from San Francisco to Houston, and it was a culture shock for me when I moved. Oh, Nietzsche. Nietzsche? Is it Nietzsche? Could you type that phonetically for me? Is it Nietzsche or Nietzsche? Moving to Houston was a culture shock for me because I'm born and raised in San Francisco, and I'm not saying this is the reality for all Black people who are raised in California or raised in San Francisco, but I didn't even experience racism until I was 20. I didn't experience a lot of the typical Black race problems. I never had problems with being a dark-skinned woman. I didn't get teased. So when I moved to Houston, I think I was 26 when I moved to Houston, I arrived with a sort of freedom in my mind. And it was being there that I started to see how like unspoken rules go. There was like this division, but it was unspoken. Like nobody said it, but it's like everybody quietly agreed with where they lived, how they moved, who they hung out with. And I just learned this as I started to acclimate to the culture in Houston, Texas. And one of the benefits to arriving to a place with a free mind is that you don't quietly agree to everything else that everybody else quietly agrees to. And how that showed up for me when I started a company is I started a fashion marketing company for up and coming businesses. And this all connects, so hang in there. I want to share the story about this ex-boyfriend of mine who was born and raised in Houston, and how we get the signal young, Nietzsche. And for anybody else here who's young and you're powerful and you're navigating how to date, marriage, if that's a desire, when you are young and powerful and you either don't really see your power yet because it's who you are, right? You've yet to own it, but you keep bumping up against these quiet issues with men. And so anyway, I started this fashion marketing company for fashion beauty brands. And I wanted to put on a big fashion show to introduce myself and my company and its services to the city of Houston. And I work. So I started reading local magazines, newspapers to find out who's who, what's what, where's where. And so I found out about the modeling agencies there and the magazines and the fashion. And so this modeling agency in Houston, Texas, I went to them to see about being a sponsor and having some of them their models in my show and all that. And they ended up giving me a check for, I think, $10,000 to be a sponsor. And this guy I was dating at the time, who was 12 years older than me. I mean, I was shocked. I was like, because we think older means mature. We think older means, and it doesn't always mean that. It doesn't always mean mature. It doesn't always mean wise. It doesn't mean he's still not going to feel some kind of way about you being able to do things that either he doesn't do, or he didn't even realize he had limitations in his own mind until he got into relationship with you and you're doing these things. And he's like, I'm supposed to be the man here. How you? Right? And so I remember we were in the car one day and we were talking, and he was like, you got these white people giving you all this money. And he said it with this sort of resentment in his voice. And I didn't say anything at the time. I just noticed. And it was an issue in the relationship, because I am ambitious. I'm excited. Like, I know I can do things and I'm going for it. And that's it. And I didn't realize how much some men, not all, but how some men can have a problem with women's ambitions because their manhood, which if his manhood is dependent on this, it's not solid, it's not true, it's not powerful, that their manhood and their feeling needed and important depends on you being small. It depends on you lying to them or withholding or just being an attractive thing that speaks sweetly to them at all times. And if you would like to say something that perhaps they don't like, make sure you are, and perhaps just don't say it at all, because men are, and all the while, he's never knowing who you are. You're never speaking truthfully, etc. And then he erodes the relationship over time. And then it also sends the message, as it's sent to me, that, oh shit, men, I don't know how this relationship thing is gonna work. The gypsy, hey, every time I would come up with a new idea, it was always downplayed. Yeah. Hi, Ms. Blessed. Ms. Blessed says some love toxic secretly. Yeah, it's anyway, I could say more about what I think you mean by that, but to stay somewhat focused in the topic for today, I wanted to share with those of you who are younger, right, under 30, or maybe 40, right, depending on what's going on with you, that it is a real thing, when a man can feel this way. If you date older men, younger men, it can be the same. Age does not mean he's more welcoming of your ambition or excitement or exuberance or and so, as I was saying, let's take it to the end of your life. Let's take it to your last year on earth. Let's take it there. And how many of you have really, what they say, lived in the end, where you think about your last year on earth? I think a lot of us are so caught up in our lives, and this is how we end up, 40, 50 years old, looking around like, the time just flew by. How did I get here? I can't believe. I have a family member who was so mad when she got to 30 and she realized she had been with this man twice her age who just sucked her youth up. Just sucked her youth up. He never married, and I don't even know if she wanted that, but she was just so mad that, gosh, I got here and I've been with him pretty much all of my 20s, and there's nothing here. I haven't grown. He's insecure. He's abusive. So I want, for those of you who are younger, where you don't really think about old age and dying when you're 25, 27, 32, right? And sometimes even if you're 40, 45 and you're busy, you're not thinking about it. And then at some point it kicks in, though, that those heavy thoughts of mortality kick in inevitably at some point. It could be 40, it could be 52, but it's going to kick in, where you're going to realize, gosh, your body's changing, the reality of who you are, how your decisions have led you up to this day. where you are, and you're like, I'm responsible for this. I'm responsible for every choice I made that got me here, regardless of who or what is in your life at that time. And so I invite you right now to go to your last year on earth, or your last month, which for some of you, you could be in your last month right now and don't even know it. But let's just say you expect to live until 77. And let's say you're 76 and you're looking at what you created, and you chose the path of not saying what you mean, keeping yourself small, not growing because you know your husband is not going to grow, um, and all the things that you may be doing right now to ensure that although you're unfulfilled in the marriage, you want to make sure it stays together. And you decided to pay the price for your whole life to stay in that marriage. Who knows what the benefits are? Right? Your bills are paid. You never had to think about paying a bill. You had a male person in the house. What else, right? You fill in the blank with whatever could be seen as a benefit for staying in that situation, although you never touch your potential, although you never come into knowing who you really are. And you get to 76 and you look at what you've lived and you say, I don't know, maybe you have adult children and they're doing well. So you're like, well, at least I raised some good children, and that is wonderful. And maybe that's all I was meant to do. I'm making this up. So just imagine and think about this from right here, right now, okay? And we do have some wonderful memories. We do. Oh, God, we have some. Remember that time? Remember that time? You got these wonderful memories. And you have great children who, now you have grandchildren. The grandchildren come around, and that's such a joy to be a grandparent. It's such a joy. Like, wow, look, we have duplicated and cloned, and look at what we've done here. Proud. So proud of that. Gypsy said, oh, I needed to see this today. Thank you. You're welcome. Married for 11 years. I'll be 33 next month. Oh, yeah, you got married young. I got married young, too. He proposed when I was 19, and we got married when I was 20 or 21. So I know what it's like to be a young married person. And so let's say that's the path you took. Can you imagine what that would feel like, knowing that you never touched your potential, that you never got to know who you really were? This is the difficult decisions to make, okay? And I'm going to close out with a story. Not now, but in a moment. So you have to make that decision for yourself. Is that worth it in the end? And we don't know what that's going to look. I made that up, right? You may never have kids. You know, your kids may, we don't know. Your kids may choose not to have kids. I mean, we don't know what that's actually going to look like. But I just made up a story of, will you be okay when you get to whatever is your last year, 76 years old, 86, 106, and you look back on your life and recognize that you chose to stay in something where you were not fulfilled. Now imagine that you took the no regret path. The no regrets path. Now I can speak to you as a woman who's on the no regret path. Pros and cons. So I already shared with you the cons. The pros are, oh God, I know love. I know who I am. I have had experiences where I no longer wonder about things. One of the things that happens when you choose the traditional path is you wonder about a lot in your old age. And you'll never know. I wonder if I would have done this, what about, I wonder if I would have done this, and you never know. It's just a wonder. When you actually take the no regret path, you end up doing, I could write a book. The level of the freedom that people constantly are talking about they want. Real freedom. When I say freedom, I mean freedom in the mind, freedom in the heart, freedom in your being. Because what happens on the traditional path is there's a sort of safety and there's a lulling you into complacency. It lulls you there. And that's how much of humanity lives. So it's just so easy to stay there because it's normal. When you take the no regret path, you end up doing things that are counter to normal. So what happens is you end up meeting other people who live counter to culture. You end up doing things and experiencing things that you never would have experienced on the traditional path. Your eyes open up in a real way. When I say real, I mean experiential way. Because you didn't read about this thing, you didn't hear about it from a friend, you didn't dream about it and imagine it, but you actually lived it. So there's a nuance that you know. There's a flavor that you know because you touched it and it was, and then all these things you could have never dreamed about or predicted or planned or wrote in a journal, and it really fills in your life. And a lot of the, I know heaven on earth. I know it. This is why I can stand. So, like, no matter how horrible a day I have, no matter how disappointed or upset I am about something, because I know it from experience, nothing can ever throw me off kilter. Nobody can say anything. Nothing can happen in my life that makes me like, well, maybe it's not true after all. Maybe I'm just being idealistic. Maybe. That's the no regret path. And when a woman says to me, I want to know who I am, what am I? Who am I? What am I? It's highly unlikely you will come to know that about yourself as a married person. Unless, here's the caveat, your husband wants to be on the no regret path too. Now you meet those people. They are clearly exceptional couples. They are not normal couples. They live very abnormal lives. Sometimes I know couples like this where they will live apart for a month or two or more, go on their own adventures. The only sin is no permission. It's sort of like some of them do have multiple sex partners. It just really depends on the agreement in that marriage. But they are living non-traditional paths, although they are married legally. Okay? And so I share that with you so you can get some perspective of what's available for you and the pros and cons of traditional marriage and living the, regret path. Or maybe it won't be a regret for you. I don't know. I have not chosen that path. I've never wanted that path. I'm just laying that down. Or the no regret path, which is full of adventure. Man, story after story after story. And there are the cons to that, as I talked about, the bills. I pay my own bills. I'm not having regular sex. Sometimes when I do want a man around to go do things with here and there. Now for me, and I'm an exception, so this may not be true for you, but 98% of the time I want to be alone. 98%. Then there's that 2%. So I'm somebody who could get married, but I need a lot of time. Like, I don't even think I want to live in a house with a man that I'm married to. Or we live in a house that's so spacious that I could go for a week without seeing him, and we both still live in the house. So we would need 6,000 square feet, something like that, where I could have plenty of time by myself, and I'll see you in a week or more, or 3 days, or something like that. So this is me knowing who I am. So it's so very important that you know who you are. And I want to share this in closing. For those of you who are married and there's lots of things to like. He pays all the bills. It's comfortable, right? It's comfortable, it's familiar, it's safe, right? You live in a nice house. Like when I was married, we lived in a well-manicured cul-de-sac in the suburbs. We had space, nice house. I had all the material wants. We had multiple cars, okay? So I had what most women most or a lot of women want, okay? And in that marriage, so I'm talking to those of you who are in a very comfortable, abundant marriage right now. In that marriage, over time, once the comfort became normal, I was completely safe, completely comfortable, it was completely normal. I was on the deed. Everything was set up, okay? I would find myself at home cooking and crying. Now, I'm speaking for myself, right? Maybe your reality looks different. I would find myself cooking and crying. One of the worst situations happened where, in the middle of cooking, I just collapsed on the floor. He wasn't home, he was gone at work. I just collapsed on the floor and was crying on the kitchen floor, cooking, knowing that I need to leave this marriage. And I can't believe I'm thinking this, saying this, feeling this, knowing this. I can't, like, why? It didn't make any logical sense. None. Zero, zero, zero logical sense. And so I share that because for those of you who feel maybe like foolish or embarrassed or like ungrateful, how could you? You got this good man who's doing all the things that a man is supposed to do, providing, protecting. My man would fight for me. He's doing the things. But I know that I'm not going to become the woman who I'm called to be in that marriage. What a terrible decision to have to make. Horrible. Absolutely horrible. My stomach would hurt. I would be, ugh. Now that's how outrageous emotionally it was for me. Every woman is different. Some women feel that and they endure it until they get to 55. These women are my clients right now. Okay? Needing to have conversations with their husbands, etc. Oh, you know what I just realized? I need to meet with my client in like 3 minutes. So I'm closing now. No, I am not an Aquarius. Someone asked if I'm an Aquarius. So I share that so you can just get some perspective here and start to look at, is there a decision for you to make? Is there a conversation for you to have? Be honest, because the end of your life will be here. Death, I use that in so much of my decision making today when I'm disappointed or flustered or whatnot. Naima, in the end, what will be important? In the end, when you're looking back, when you're in your last month on earth, what will be important? You're very welcome, Miss Supreme. All right, I'm out of here. I look forward to connecting with you all tomorrow, 12 p.m. Pacific, here on TikTok, here on Facebook. And consider coming to Women Gods Gather in Atlanta, March 16th, 17th, and 23rd, if you are the original woman who is sincere about knowing who you are and coming into a raw place to be your whole self and transforming, releasing shame, getting to know your full primal feminine power in a physical environment curated exclusively for women like us. Details are with the link in my bio on TikTok or with the link with this video here on Facebook. I'll see you all tomorrow at 12 p.m. Pacific. Thank you so much for being here and engaging. I came and looked at my notifications.